definitely welcome that. So I'm going to start this with Dr. Christy Chang. Thank you, Dr. Chang.
Thank you, Wanda. And let me just share my screen and hope the magic of Zoom will work. So I hope everybody see my slides now. And then after I finish, Dr. Shriver will tell you about K programs, and then we'll do question and answer all in the end. But if you have urgent questions, please let us know. I'll be happy to stop at any point. So today it's all about junior faculties, new investigators, and what is our university, as well as MIH programs that are available for them. So I'm going to start by telling you about CTSA KL2 programs nationally, and then also what's available on UMB campus through our CTSA and institutionally supported KL2 programs. And then Dr. Shriver will tell you about MIH's K programs. So for people who are not knee-deep in clinical translational research, CTSA stands for Clinical and Translational Science Awards. So this is a MIH center, MCAT, which is the National Center for Advancing Translational Science. And then its goal is to facilitate and accelerate discoveries in the translational arena from bench to bedside and ultimately into community and having direct impact. So currently there are 62 hubs nationally to carry out the mission for the CTSA, and each one of them have a career development core. And these are designated resource for junior faculties and new investigators. And what's the goals that we want to support and develop clinical and translational researchers who will become future leaders. So the location of the 62 hubs shown on this map. When the program got started in 2006, there were only 12 hubs, and it has quickly expanded to having 62, with University of Maryland becoming one of the hubs in 2019. So nationally, the CTSA KL2 programs are for early stage investigators. They can have an MD, PhD, or equivalent doctoral degrees. And they offer mentorship. That's a team of mentors really who are from different disciplines, and they have to be established investigator with substantial experience both in research and in mentoring. And so the KL2 scholars are offered salary support and protected time, as well as research funding. And the program lasts 3 to 5 years, and but people can exit when they transition to independence. And so the goal is that at the end of their time as a KL2 scholars, they will have obtained individual MIH awards, such as K Award, KOA, K23, or R1. And given that this is a substantial investment on the MCAT part, this whole process is actually quite well scrutinized. And then a paper was published using logic model to look at the impact of career development programs. So you start with what they call input. The participants are analyzed for their backgrounds and different matrix. And then the program structures are also quite well scrutinized. So the participant entered the career development program, then they are also evaluated based on their publication, whether or not they stay in research, stay in academia, and their success in getting independent funding. Then of course, ultimately the impact of the entire program on the healthcare process will also be analyzed. So 2 studies have already looked at the outcome of KL2 programs. So one was published in 2015, I believe, 2017. So you look at all 48 institutes or hubs that have KL2 programs. and they overall look at 914 scholars. And a little later, another paper look at even more scholars from 55 institutes and over 1,500 scholars. And the numbers are pretty stable. Overall, less than 20%, around 18% of the applications were actually selected for funding. Most of them are people with MDs, but you see there are also a significant number of scholars come from other clinical training background and non-clinical PhDs. And slightly over 50% of the applicants, funded applicants, are female, and then 12% are those who are considered underrepresented in medicine. So what about their success upon completion of KL2 program? So this paper found that after they complete training, a couple years out, 96% of them are actively engaged in research. So 2 years after completion, 39, almost 40% of them have received independent funding. Non-MIH funding outweigh MIH fundings a little slightly, and non-clinicians, so the PhD scholars are a little more, twice as likely as the clinicians to obtain independent funding. And which given that clinicians are spending quite a bit of time doing clinical duties, this is not a surprise finding. But what was reassuring is that female and underrepresented KL2 scholars are equally likely to obtain independent funding. So this is what the data look like. This is tell you the number of years since completion of their KL2 trainings, and the number of KL2 scholars in each category are listed on the top. And then you see that the dark bar means they have obtained R01 level funding or similar funding. And some of them have career development awards or other independence award. And then these are just scholars who have obtained career development award. So about 2-3 years after they've completed KL2 program, over 70% of them have obtained funding. And then this is, of course, a very desirable outcome, and show that KL2 scholars outperform non-scholars in many matrix. So what does our program look like? So our CTSA program on campus started in 2019. So we offer salary support up to $110,000 plus friendship benefits, and the scholars are provided with 75% protected effort just to focus on coursework and research. They have a mentoring team that's multidisciplinary, and the mentors also receive training and they are assessed as well. And then in addition to protected time, they receive funding for tuition, for research, and also for travel. And who are eligible to become a KL2 scholars? First of all, you had to be interested in clinical translational research. They had to be US citizens or permanent residents with a clinically relevant doctoral program. And they must be either pending or already appointed as a full-time faculty at UMB, one of the school in UMB, and they cannot be a faculty for more than 5 years, because the whole goal is to capture those in early stage career. So the application and selection process look like this. In September, the request for funding announcement goes out in September. During October, November, and December, we're answering questions about eligibility, and we give 2 information sessions. The applications are due end of January, and they are sent out to be reviewed. So the reviewers are invited and selected from all the participating schools. And so each application gets 5 reviewers. And for transparency, representation, and fairness, every applications are reviewed by reviewers from at least 3 different schools, including one from their own school that's not in the same department and have other conflict of interest. So reviewers meet in March to discuss the merits of all the applications and rank them. Top candidates are invited for interview, and we announce the scholars selected end of April, beginning of May. Then at that point, NCATS will review and approve our selection, and then also IRB approvals, IRCOOK, and all the regulatory piece are managed in this period. And our scholars start their appointments on July 1st. And at this point, we start to work with them on their individual career development plans, work with their mentors, starting their training as mentors if they haven't done so, create their year 1 budgets and so forth. So in August, we have our award ceremony and orientation. And then as the KL2 scholar start their coursework and start to their research, it's time for our program to start the whole process over again. And there are actually 2 types of KL2 scholars currently. One is funded through the CTSA, and faculties from all 6 schools on campus can participate, and will select 1 scholar every year. And we also have a parallel program, what we call institutionally supported, or sometimes internal KL2 scholars. So 5 schools participate in this particular program: dentistry, medicine, nursing, pharmacy, and social work. And 1 scholar is selected every year from each school. So every 3 years, the process I just described to you actually happened twice, once for CTSA and one for institutional supported scholars. So for scholars, their experience as a KL2 scholar, it's listed here. The process is customized for each scholar, but they are common things. So typically, they spend the first 18 months on acquiring their degree or certificates and taking courses that what we call foundational curriculum. So we are making sure they have the biostatistical tools and skills. They have training in research ethics and health informatics, and they receive training also on leadership and grant writing. And then they also are taking classes that are specific for their research program. So if they're interested in longitudinal studies, artificial intelligence, they get all those coursework done during this part. And then at the same time, they are getting lots of valuable tools from the research career development program that Marey Shriver runs. And then they are attending seminars on other grant in progress talks by other KL2 scholars, both at University of Maryland and then Johns Hopkins. They are attending seminars and they are conducting their research and collecting preliminary data. Now we hope by the end of year 2, they submit their K awards, K23, or some of them are actually ready for our level awards. And during the whole process, roughly every 6 months or so, we're checking with them and then track their progress and make sure that the mentoring relationship is going well and they meet all the other goals. So that means the mentors are very busy too. So they are required to meet with their KL2 scholars at least once every 2 weeks to supervise, to make recommendations, and make sure the projects are going well. And they also provide feedback on the career development aspect of the KL2 scholars. So by twice a year, we receive a report on their progress. And of course, when the scholars are giving talks about their own project in the Grant in Progress seminar, the mentors attend. And also the mentors participate in a skill training workshop that's offered by Jennifer Almuller on our campus. So, and in this process, they are not happening in vacuum. They meet and then also work closely with their equivalents at the KL2 program at Hopkins and elsewhere. So they attend seminars, they attend grand progress talks together. And once pandemic hit and hosting speakers virtually become very affordable, the KL2 scholars started visiting each other on different campuses. So we are part of the visiting scholar programs. And our scholars are also in writing accountability groups with local case scholars and also elsewhere to make sure their writing goals are met. They attend the translational science meetings and the leadership part of the KL2 program, of course, meet regularly with our Hopkins counterparts and also other national leaders. So who are the KL2 scholars? So we have two CTSA KL2 scholars. 2019 scholar is Dr. Jenna Alexander from the Department of Ophthalmology. And Jenna used ultrasound microscopy to examine children with cataract to see what biomarkers they are to optimally manage surgery time and to promote better outcome and prevent glaucoma. And our 2020 scholar is Dr. Lydia Tian from Institute of Human Virology. So Lydia's interest is in hepatitis B and co-infection with HIV. And then she used receptor A, like receptor A agonists to study disease progression. And we have 1 year, one class of institutionally supported KL2 scholars. We have Cindy Chavez from School of Dentistry. Cindy is interested in providing dental care to patients with special needs. And now from School of Medicine, we have Stephanie Chen from Department of Neurology. And Stephanie is interested in using metabolic markers to help patients with refractory temporal lobe epilepsy. From School of Nursing, we have Rachel Brennan. And Rachel is interested in using shared decision-making tools to help especially mothers who are people of color and to optimize their care during childbirth. And then from School of Pharmacy, we have Dr. Daniel Cato, and Daniel is interested in pregnant women with complex substance use disorder, and then to help them improve pregnancy outcome. And lastly, we have Jaya Kredar from School of Social Work. So Jaya is a new faculty, and she's interested in using multimedia, social media especially, to promote health, sexual health, education, and HIV prevention. So what have we done in the last 18 months since the program started? 3 of our scholars had completed their didactic training. So Stephanie, Jaya, and Rachel have all finished their certificate of dissemination implementation science program. And when pandemic hit, everybody reorganized and mostly have recovered from pandemic-induced delay on their research. And Rachel and Sydney even pivot towards pandemic COVID-related research, and they have both published papers about either pregnancy or dental care during pandemic. So Jaya was a new faculty in School of Social Work. She became a KL2 scholar before she even started the first day as a faculty. And she has also received teaching recognition for her teaching, besides other aspects of her faculty contribution. And Dania Cato was selected to be a Robert Wood Johnson Cultural Health Leader in recognition for her work in substance use. And Dania has also received an FDA grant for 2 years to work on her project with substance use. And currently we have actually, this is a typo, we have 3 grants pending. Janet has submitted a K23 award, Sydney a XO1, and Rachel application to the Association of Women's Health Obstetrical and Neonatal Nurse. And so throughout all this time, we've been meeting monthly over lunch. So I think this could be a secret sauce of sorts. So I cannot stress the importance of peer mentoring. So when we have our lunch meetings, and it's a time to celebrate all the accomplishment, also to discuss any roadblocks and obstacles, to normalize them, and also to validate their effort, and then to come up with strategy. So whether or not what is about recruitment, working with research coordinates, how to manage budgets, every aspect of a junior faculty's career are open, and it's a very supportive and non-judgmental space. And I really think that's a crucial component of every career development program. So with that, I would thank Dr. Davis. Dr. Davis is not only the director of ICTR, his own tremendous success as a clinician scientist and his vision for the next generation of clinical translational researcher, it's found in every aspect of our program. So while I was involved with the internal KL2 program, the CTSA KL2 program was actually started by Rose Viscotti, and she retired in the 2020, and I cannot be more grateful for her contribution to all aspects of the KL2 program. And I'm assisted in every aspect by Gracie Khalil, our associate director, and who has also been there since day one. And of course, we received tremendous help and support from the administrative core of ICTR, and I will take this opportunity to recognize Megan Bencharo, Wanda Fink, Molly Lotz, and Samantha Herberson. So given that, instead of take your questions, I will hand this over to Dr. Shriver to tell you about the NIHK program.
Thank you so much, Christy. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Can you see my slides there? Hopefully you can see my slides.
Yeah, we do.
Great, thank you. Give it 1 minute to load. All right. So thank you so much. Thank you for everyone for joining us, and thank you for the invitation to speak on NIHK awards. I think Dr. Christy Chang made such a great case for how the KL2 awards can be an incredible springboard for early stage investigators to go on and pursue funding at the NIH. And so now we're going to shift and we're going to talk specifically about the career development awards that are available through the NIH. So the NIH is very dedicated to supporting faculty throughout all of the stages of their career. But we're going to focus specifically today on the type of career development awards, which are also known as Ks, that are geared towards senior postdoctoral fellows and early stage faculty, and really meant to drive an investigator towards independence. So these are kind of where we're going to focus on today, but it is important to note that there are additional K mechanisms which are intended for mid or senior investigators with a very different purpose, but we're going to focus on the Mentored Career Development Award. So let's focus on these and talk a little bit about the purpose and what NIH is looking for, and how they're hoping to help investigators with this mechanism. So these Mentored Career Development Awards are really intended to support the career development of individuals who either have a doctoral or a clinical degree, and you have the potential to develop into an independent investigator. So you haven't yet achieved independence. And what does that mean in the eyes of the NIH? That means that you haven't acquired an R01 yet. So one of the things that I think is easily overlooked for an NIHK is the fact that reviewers and the NIH and the funder is really looking for investigators who are dedicated to research, committed to having a research career, but clearly need some additional training to go on and successfully compete for an R01 or independent funding. Now, this typically takes the form of formal training in the form of additional didactic coursework, attending conferences, short courses, and then combining that with informal hands-on training, learning specific techniques and skills that will then help you fill whatever gaps that you have in your training. Now, obviously, a component of that informal training is having a mentor and a mentoring team that's going to help in facilitating that. So that is also another very important component of an NIHK. And for any of the K mechanisms that we're about to talk about, they are expecting that the investigator have a minimum of 75% protected time from their institution to actually work on their training and their research. And this is confirmed through a letter that you'll have to submit with your application from your department chair, which is promising the protected time and the resources that you need to do the required training and research. The one caveat being that for some institutes and centers, that if you are a surgeon and you are of a particular surgical specialty, I believe there are 2 at this time that are counted, you can have as low as 50% protected time. But in most other instances, they're looking for 75% protected time. So this is a overview of the 4 most common K mechanisms for senior postdocs and early stage investigators. And this is really meant to provide a little bit of a comparison between eligibility and what the different Ks are looking to support, so that you can use to reference when it comes time to start thinking about what K mechanism you're interested in pursuing. We are going to start by diving in and looking at the K99R00 and what makes that different from the other K mechanisms, and then we'll move on to the other 3. So let's talk about the K99R00. So the K99R00 has much different eligibility and structuring compared to some of the other K awards. So the biggest one being that for this mechanism, there is no citizenship requirement. You do not need to be a US citizen or a permanent resident. Because of that, it makes it an extremely competitive mechanism. There are more applications that go in every year, and because of that, the success rate is typically on the lower side because there are just more applications going in. This award is typically geared for anyone who has a clinical or a research doctorate degree. So it really spans the gamut, and it doesn't discriminate whether you're an MD versus a PhD. The one element that is also very specific for the K99 is that you're not allowed to have more than 4 years of postdoctoral experience. So 4 years from your terminal degree. And if you are a faculty, you are not eligible for this award. Or if you receive a faculty position by the time the grant is awarded, you also are no longer eligible. So it really is a very specific time frame that they're looking to support postdoctoral fellows. You are expected to still have the 75% protected time that will be devoted to this award during the entire duration of its execution. So the purpose of the K99 is to facilitate a timely transition for postdocs to then go on and be successful in acquiring an independent tenure track position or equivalent faculty position. So now the other thing that's very unique about this award is that it comes in 2 phases, which you won't see with the other K mechanisms. So it provides up to 5 years of support, but the first phase is the K99 phase. So that's when you are working with your mentor as a postdoctoral fellow, working on your career development. And that happens for up to 2 years in the first phase of the award. The second phase is the R00. So once you are able to show that you were successfully able to complete the K99 phase, and then you show that you have acquired a tenure track faculty position, typically at another institution, once you can show that you have an offer letter and the resources, the program officer then will approve your transition to the R00 phase, where you have up to 3 years to actually conduct the independent portion of your project. This is a very, again, unique mechanism compared to the others. We have great resources in the Office of Postdoctoral Scholars. And if you have any questions about this particular mechanism, if you're looking for resources, I highly recommend reaching out to Dr. Renee Cockerham, who is kind of the K99 guru and who can really help you in any way for this particular grant mechanism. So again, the K99 R00 is a little bit of a different beast. It's specifically for postdocs. It comes in a 2-phase and you're expected to transition to faculty during. When you are thinking about which K mechanism is right for you, the other thing to consider is what will the focus of your research be? Because that's going to determine ultimately which parent announcement you apply for when it comes time to put your grant application and ultimately submit it to the NIH. So this is always important to keep in mind as well, because when we get to the end of this and we're talking about eligibility, you're going to have to know which parent announcement you're looking at. So there are 3 different announcements for every funding opportunity through the NIH. They are broken down by clinical trial, no clinical trial, and then basic experimental studies with humans. The NIH has a website for determining if your study is a clinical trial, and they actually have a really nice decision tree that you can use to answer questions about your project, and that will tell you whether the NIH would classify your study as a clinical trial or not. I know it can get a little tricky between the independent clinical trial and independent basic experimental studies with humans. So I always recommend that once you know that you're going to be working with patients, the best course of action is to reach out and talk to a scientific contact listed in the program announcement and discuss which mechanism would be the most appropriate based on your research. So now we're going to move on to the KL1, the KO8, and K23, which tend to be grouped together because their eligibility criteria align more closely than what we see with the K99. So what makes these mechanisms a little different? So the first and most obvious one is the eligibility requirement as far as being a citizen. You're required to be a US citizen or a permanent resident. The other is the type of degree that you hold. So KO1s are typically meant for individuals who have doctoral degrees. This is typically for PhDs. And then clinician scientists, anyone who holds an MD or an MD PhD or any sort of clinical degree would then apply for a KO8 or a K23. And we'll go into kind of what makes those two different. Just like all of the other K mechanisms, again, you're still required to have that 75% protected time from your department. Because there are no other typical time requirements for eligibility, sometimes, again, the question is, well, when is the right time to apply? And typically we see senior postdocs or new faculty members applying for these particular K mechanisms. Now, with that said, we've certainly seen success with investigators who are further out from their terminal degree. Ultimately, you have to be able to convince the reviewers that you need additional training. And if you can do that and show that you're dedicated to research, there are clear gaps that need to be filled. Ultimately, that it will help you be successful. So let's go through each of these briefly and talk about what makes them different. So for the KO1, this provides 3 to 5 years of support. So you're not required to have a full 5 years of support. And this supports postdocs or early stage research faculty who have doctoral degrees in working on their research and their training to achieve independence. Similar to the K99s, there again are 3 parent announcements based on the type of research that you're doing. So generally, if you are a PhD, you are going to be looking at the KO1 mechanism and if it would be appropriate for you. Now, for clinician investigators, you would be leaning towards a KO8, which is a mentored clinician scientist Research Career Development Award. Again, 3 to 5 years, depending on what you need. And it's specifically for clinician scientists to gain additional training in didactic study and mentor research necessary to become independent. And these are the 3 different funding announcements. Now, the thing that gets a little tricky with clinicians is that there's an additional K award, which is the K23. So this is specific again for clinicians, but for clinicians who are using, who are conducting patient-oriented research. So again, 3 to 5 years for anyone who's specifically working with patients or working with human material, as long as you're still interacting with the patients. Again, it can be a little confusing to figure out whether the K08 or the K23 is the right mechanism for you. One of the first suggestions that I have for clinician investigators is to first do a little bit of homework and figure out if the institute and center that you are interested in applying to offers both mechanisms, because some institutes and centers only support one or the other. If they happen to offer both, again, reaching out to a scientific contact and talking about the type of research that you're doing is often a good way to figure out where the appropriate home would be for your studies. But typically, if you're working with human subjects, you're going to be applying for a K23. If you are applying for a K01, K08, or K23, or you're just interested in learning more about them, I highly recommend reaching out to me or anyone in our office. We have a number of resources available, and we're always happy to answer any questions and help you with some of that initial homework and figuring out kind of the next steps to take if this is something that you're interested in pursuing. The biggest take-home message that I want to leave you with is that K awards are heterogeneous. I think we could kind of see that from that initial table looking at the K99 compared to the K01, K08, and K23. But even for each of those, what each institute and center is looking for, it varies greatly. So it's important to remember that not every NIH institute and center supports every K mechanism. So you really need to check the program announcement. The NIH is broken into 27 different institutes and centers, which are sorted by organ or disease state. So typically looking at the type of research that you do and trying to find that home in an institute and center, and then look at whether they offer a K award that's appropriate for your eligibility. The one that comes to mind always for me is the National Cancer Institute. So they are one of the few institutes that don't have an NIH K01 for PhDs open to everybody. They have a diversity specific award, but they don't just have an open parent announcement for a K01. And the same is true for a K99 and R00. Not every institute and center supports that mechanism. So you really have to make sure that you can find a home for the grant mechanism that you would be eligible for and interested in pursuing. Once you confirm that an institute and center that aligns with your research is supporting that mechanism, you still want to look at the guidelines, because each institute and center often has specific requirements regarding whether they're even willing to participate. Do they have specific eligibility criteria? Some institutes and centers will have time from degree for eligibility, or the type of position you have to be in, whether it's a faculty position or a postdoc. They have specific requirements for budgets. What are they willing to give for salary and research funds, and then research topics. So often there are different institutes and centers that have priority areas, and you can only apply for that K mechanism if your research topic fits within one of 3 buckets. So how do you figure out all of this information, and where do you start? The NIH has a really great site called the NIH K Kiosk. And when you click on this site, there's a screenshot here. It allows you to put in what stage you are at in your career. And once you do that, it will pull up the K mechanisms that you would be eligible for. You can then look at each of the details regarding eligibility requirements, as well as they'll show you the active funding opportunity announcements and parent announcements. So that's really when you can read through and see if you would be eligible, and most importantly, who is that scientific contact that you can reach out to get more information and confirm that you are eligible. One of the greatest benefits of pursuing a K award is the benefit that it has in the long term of your career. So Dr. Chang had mentioned the positive outcomes for KL2 scholars, and it's no surprise that when the NIH did a recent analysis of outcomes for K awardees, that they found very similar positive trends. So it's actually a recent publication in 2019. They examined, they compared awardees who received K awards, and they actually compared this to unfunded applicants. So all of the people who applied and were either triaged or reviewed and not funded. And what they found was that K awardees were more likely to be awarded their first R01 or, interestingly, a first research project grant. So this is any research grant that's available through the NIH. They still saw an increase in success rate for those other grant mechanisms as well. And interestingly, this trend continued through even for second R01s. So we all know that there's that first very critical hurdle of getting your first R01, and then the second, even more challenging hurdle of getting your next R01. And so it's clear that a K award is just a great way to, one, get that protected time and the resources to continue doing research that you're passionate about and to get publications and preliminary data. And then also to show that you are competitive for peer-reviewed funding, because obviously it's always a very competitive environment. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen and we will open it up for questions. I saw that it looked like our chat may have been active. So hopefully I am out.
There's a question about funding mechanism suitable for research associates. Would you like to start with that question, and we'll see who else?
Sure.
Other questions.
Okay. So yes, so how about researchers? So typically, again, it's a little dependent on the institute and center as far as the type of title that you have for K awards. So in our experience for K01s, K08s, and K23s, there are specific institutes and centers that will require you to be a postdoc. And then there are others that will leave it pretty open for early stage investigators. What we have found is that because it's so competitive for K awards, having the institutional commitment and specifically having a letter showing that you're going to be promoted to assistant professor is typically what makes an investigator the most competitive. And we've certainly seen postdocs, research associates be awarded and then be promoted to assistant professor, but it really is that first faculty position is typically what makes investigators the most competitive for the institutes and centers that have eligibility criteria that are the most open. And that would all be described in the institutional commitment letter, that one-page letter that says that you're going to have the 75% protected time and resources available through the institute. If that did not answer your question, let me know. And always happy to talk about this further offline as well.
So research associates are eligible to apply to the KL2 program. And then, but I will also encourage you to look at funding mechanism on your professional organizations, other sort of early career grants like American Heart, American Kidney Association, and so forth. Any other questions for either Dr. Shriver or myself?
Dr. Chang, hi. It looks like we have a question in the Q&A field. Samantha Reeves, she's asking, is there a minimum number of publications needed to be competitive for the internal K and or NIH K awards?
So Mary, that's definitely an all-time favorite questions. So there is no magic number. You should have some publication. You should have as many first author publications possible. And for internal, once you're being a faculty and have some independence, the marker for independence is that you move from first author to the last author position. So I would definitely try to keep that in mind as for every research paper you're working on, negotiate for authorship early and perhaps even often. Get co-first author paper if possible by contributing more. And if you're not the first author, and then if you are not the last author, see if you could be corresponding author, and I also lean more way, but definitely possible publish in high profile journals. I don't mean you should aim for Science and Cell, but definitely the top journals in your specialty. Those are the things that reviewers are looking for. As for number, I don't know, Marey has more to add to that.
No, I know this is always a favorite question. The thing that I always remind everyone is that it's very different depending on the mechanism that you're applying for. So obviously for KO1s, you're talking about investigators typically who have PhDs, and so they tend to be published more than clinicians. Not that that's the rule, but it's just typically what we see. When I first started in the career development office, I interviewed, I think, close to 10 program officers and asked if there was a magic number, and they all kind of laughed and said no. One was brave enough to tell me somewhere between 5 and 15 publications, which is obviously a very widespread. And so it really, again, I think, as Christy mentioned, it's really about showing that you've published recently, and that you're publishing in journals that are appropriate for your field.
Yes, and I would say use your MIH BioSketch very intelligently. Clearly state your contribution to the field. If you're not the first author, but you made significant contribution, state that in your BioSketch. If your paper were cited, was picked to be profiled in another related journal, anything to show impact of your work, definitely use that space to make sure nothing's overlooked by reviewers. And different paper, review paper, a clinical case study versus a research publication are weighted differently.
And make sure you have your My Bibliography link that's updated and active so that they can see your entire list of publications as well.
Yes, and people will get feedback on their the proposal part of their grants, but I think Marey and I have since learned if you're writing for a K award, the career development piece is very important. And I would say even the other sections, especially if you're not a seasoned MIH funded researcher, make sure your BioSketch is done to the latest format and really sells all your strengths. So when convincing reviewers that additional training is needed, are there do's and don'ts that we should be aware of? It sounds like another Dr. Shriver questions.
So one of the biggest suggestions that I have is to, again, just to keep in mind the fact that you're selling them on the need for additional training. I think because it's one of the first big grants that most investigators go for, there's this need to almost show your independence and how much you've done on your own. And what ends up happening is it's not clear what additional training you need. There are candidate sections in the NIHK application, the biggest one being the candidate background section. And so rather than, again, just focusing on all of the incredible things that you've done, while you're doing that, make sure that it's clear really how your prior experience has led you to become interested in a particular area of study, but that you have gaps related to that particular area of study. And that's how the K is going to propel you to the next step, is by allowing you to get that training that you need. So it's really about marrying the prior experiences that you've had with your current interests and what gaps you have that remain. Christy, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Oh, I think definitely make very clear how solid your training is already in the field you started with, and why new skills acquired through additional training will just make you into that high impact multidisciplinary person that they all want to fund. It's really the K Awards about nurturing the next generation of investigators. So the project is a training vehicle. So they're invested in the person. So just keep that in mind. What are the gaps in training section? Could you say a few examples?
So for the NIH-K application, there is a section specifically that is called overall goals. I think it's like overall goals and objectives. And you'll state your long-term training goal, which is the type of investigator that you basically, when you grow up, what type of research do you want to do as an independent investigator? And then you'll state your short-term goals. And again, this is going to be very specific for whatever type of research that you're looking to do. And it should hopefully be a reflection of that long-term goal. But let's say that you're an investigator who has a PhD and you've done a lot of very basic science research and you're looking to transition to more translational clinical work. It could be that your long-term goal is to conduct, translational work. And so you need additional training in clinical trials, or you need additional training in areas related to working with patients, because that's not something that you have experience with. So again, it's very specific to what you're looking to do. And the flip could be the same for a clinical investigator. If you've worked with patients, but maybe you have not had a lot of experience with working at the bench and doing ELISAs or flow cytometry, those could be areas of training that you're looking to get.
Right, so it could be you're moving from more well-defined studies, hypothesis-driven approach to big science approach, right? It could be you're doing clinical research, but now you want to do community engagement and patient-driven type of research, or you have been very good at generating data and recommending clinical practice. But now you really want to go into quality of care and then maximize the impact of your work by disseminating it and so forth. So definitely Dr. Shriver's website in the Office of Research Career Development have all kinds of tools and resources that I cannot overly emphasize how useful they are. And then the ICTR resource are also easy to find. And then this seminar will be recorded and available to you as well. And of course, Dr. Shriver and I always welcome your email inquiries, and we we'll be happy to help you any way we can.
Yeah. So I'm going to enter my email into, if you are preparing a K application and you are, if you'd like to set up a consultation and talk about your application, absolutely. I'll include my email in the chat and you can email me.
Yes. So Office of Research Career Development provide individual consults. And then if you're writing a grant, I would recommend you contact them early. They are very busy.
The closer, we're like the NIH, the closer it gets to the deadline, the busier we are.
Right. The closer to the deadline, the less help it's possible, right? So just keep
Very.
that in mind.
Oh, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always think that the best time to engage is when your science is ready, right? And then, so if you're still thinking about what preliminary data I need, which aims, and what direction I should go, that's not a good time for, those are time to talk to your colleagues and mentors and close collaborators. But once those are down, then engage the Office of Career Development about grant writing. That's the most optimal time.
Absolutely.
Any other questions?